Hello YouTube, this is Hunter Surge here with another video. Today we're going to be doing a little discussion video because there's been a certain topic that's come out a lot over the course of the last few days. What with the ban list incoming, the Elestrals wish list, and like some of the things people kind of want to see on the ban list. And I've noticed that there's a big disconnect from the way several other people are thinking about are thinking about the game and what would be healthy to hit and how I'm thinking about it. So I want to like kind of dissect that. This is primarily going to be about the counter runes, but we are going to be talking overall about this idea that Elestrals decks are all composed of the same like 20 cards. You always start with those 20 cards, and that the idea that that's boring, which like to me, I'm a Vanguard player. I've played a lot of card games, but like one of the ones I've put a lot of time into is Vanguard. And Vanguard is a game where like 20 to 23 of your card slots have always been determined from the very beginning. Now, in various formats, the amount of deck building options you have within those locked in cards has varied, but that has always been the case. Vanguard is a game where you actually only have, if you're running things at max copies, only 8 different cards in your deck. It's very, very small, and that can be very constraining for deck building, especially when in older versions of Vanguard, you would have to, the grades of those cards would have to be in a specific ratio, or you would get what was called grade stuck, very similar to like the mana screw idea in Magic, where you would effectively not be able to play the game and you just lose. Um, so I'm coming from a perspective where I'm kind of used to my deck building being constrained, but like this is also something I complain about a lot in Vanguard, and I don't really have that big of an issue with it here. Um, and we're going to get into the reasons for that, but like the counter runes is where I largely disagree. Like I can see the argument a lot more with the parts of those 20 cards that aren't the counter runes. That is like that would be like Ash Rabbit, Eddie, Ambrosia, Zeus. So I want to quickly talk about those real quick. So like Ash Rabbit specifically, Ash Rabbit is a card I personally think it would be good to see get hit at some point. However, I do not want it being hit at this point, and the big reason for that is that I think it's very important for the game to feel good, in having like a good turn one, like having things you can do profitably turn one, things you can do profitably into an open board state. Those kinds of cards are very important, and some kinds of decks are swimming in cards like that. Like Frost already had an Harpoon. It just got Brummelinks. Like it's sitting pretty with that. Anything that fits in Rare Pup, sits pretty with that. But like the big problem is that a lot of deck types, a lot of elements in particular, do not really have a great card of this type. I think for a card to really feel good in this category, it needs to be like a 4 attacker or a 5 defense 1 cost. And there aren't a whole lot of those, and most of those are in Thunder, and one of them is now banned. Rabbit is the one of the least aggressive ones, and it's just like so generically useful, regardless of the composition of your deck. That is the one that you are able to very, very easily fall back on. So until we're in a situation where we just have a ton of these types of cards across all kinds of elements, and we just have tons of options to pick from, I don't really want to see Rabbit going away, because I think it would mostly hurt decks that don't fit into a category where they have one of those really good starter plays and open board state plays, and I think that would only harm the diversity in the game. So I don't want to see that happen. Eddie's just a situation of like this is the best guy for cleaning up gummy board states, and like obviously we shouldn't be hitting Eddie. I don't think anyone suggested hitting Eddie, but it is part of those 20 cards. I did think it should be here. Ambrosia is a weird one because I really like the kind of gameplay that Ambrosia enables. I really like the kind of deck building that Ambrosia enables. However, it does feel really bad when your opponent sees triple Ambrosia and you see like one or none. That feels awful. I have thought about in my head a number of times the idea of like Ambrosia becoming like a game action that you get to do a set number of times per game. But you just always have access to it. It's not something that you need to draw into, and all players have access to the same number of these Ambrosia resolutions. Because, like, as long as the good stuff slop piles with, like, 6-7 spirit types that Ambrosia helps enable aren't, like, the only deck type in the game that's viable, as it was in, like, late Daybreak, I'm completely fine with what Ambrosia enables, and I think it's really cool what it enables in that regard. And then lastly, we have Zeus. So like I used to be on the Zeus and Demeter should be like hurt in some way. They should be restricted in some way. But I'm not of that opinion anymore. So the reason I used to be of that opinion is because back in Daybreak, it felt very, very difficult for Ascension decks to succeed. And one of the big roadblocks for that was Zeus. Was Zeus and Demeter, because Zeus and Demeter represented your opponent being able to constantly threaten your Elestral. However, it's become very clear over Moonrise that Zeus and Demeter are no longer roadblocks to the success of Ascension decks. And if that being the case, my opinion then switches to it would feel really bad if I didn't get opportunities to attempt to crack these Ascensions, because I would be effectively sitting here being like, I can't do anything, I just have to draw that out, and that gameplay sucks. That's bad gameplay. So now that we've hit the other end of this, where Ascensions are viable and Zeus and Demeter are around, then I think keeping them around is actually very, very important so that players are able to consistently attempt to hit over these big Ascensions. Zeus and Demeter also do a lot to help lower stat Elestrals succeed. Like a big part of why I felt good on Tornation is because even though Winjin was a 3 attack, even though Kafmo was a 3 attack, those Elestrals could still impact the board with the help of Zeus or Demeter, because with their assistance, they're able to get to 6 attack and beat over an Ass Rabbit or something like that. So that's very important to the viability of lower statted Elestrals, in my opinion. So I wouldn't want to see Zeus go anywhere at present. I've completely flipped my opinion on Zeus and Demeter, and I think they are very core, very essential types of cards. Especially since we are now getting these sorts of 3 costs like Blistrix and Majesty, who are very specifically designed so that like you can't just beat over them with any old 1 cost, but it is very easy to beat over them if you get Blistrix to defense and specifically, and if Majesty is an attack specifically. One of their positions is vulnerable to basically any Elestral plus Zeus or Demeter. And that makes them much more reasonable for you to be able to threaten them. And that's like very, very important. It's very important that if we're going to push these 3 costs that can be difficult to deal with, that we have this accessible way of being able to deal with them. So I really don't want to see Zeus going anywhere because of that fact. Yeah. So let's talk about the counter runes. I think the big issue with the way that people are talking about the counter runes is that, like, what the counter runes are actually fulfilling is interaction during the battle phase, right? That is the through line between all of the counter runes that see common play. The counter runes that see common play are these 6 I have up at the top. It's Gorgon's Gaze, it's Shield of Achilles, Poison Tipped Arrow, Tsunami, Altar of Stars, and Argo. Those are the ones you're going to be seeing all the time. And what these all have in common, and that basically none of the other counter runes do, is these all reliably affect combat. The one that's been the most off and on is Poison Tipped Arrow, because this is the one that is the least reliable at impacting combat, It drops something's attack by 2, but very often you'll find yourself in scenarios where that isn't enough and you still lose whatever Elestral you put out. But the card is still very powerful and prevents your opponent from getting up on board state even in that situation, which comes to the actual purpose of interacting with in the battle phase and interacting with your opponent's attacks, is that you are trying to protect your board state, prevent your opponent from getting too ahead on their board state. That is the actual functionality of those 10 to 13 counter runes that you are running in your deck. That is why cards like Full Moon don't really count unless you are on a very specific build, because they aren't able to fulfill the functionality that the counter runes are actually in decks to provide. So, like, what actually happens if we take, like, let's take Gorgon's Gaze, Shield, PTA. Let's hit them all to 1. What does that actually result in? Does it actually change how many of those types of cards you would want to run? I don't think it does. It's not going to change the amount of your deck you want to be spending on cards that interact with battle. So, what would the result be? Most likely, the result would be counter rune lineups get less diverse because there are less options for counter runes that fulfill this role, and thus we are pigeonholed into using these certain specific counter runes just so that we can get up to 10. Like if we hit all those 3 to 1, then we're like, okay, we need to be running 7 between Tsunami, Alter, and Argo to get to the count we want. And that's not fantastic. Like, we have deck building choices within this category of our decks. We do. Alter and Argo are very cool cards because, like, they are typically more powerful than the generic 4 that, like, decks can fall back on regardless of what they are specifically doing. They are much more specific, require your deck to be capable of specific things, but they are much more powerful as a trade-off to that, and that introduces decisions into that portion of your deck. You have to decide, hey, is it worth it for me to be running this very expensive Argo, as well as the artifacts I need to enable it? Is that worth it for me? Am I going to put that into my counter rune lineup? Do I feel that my deck has enough Nexus Banks that Alter, despite being a very powerful card that is often effectively free and can turn on extremely powerful receive effects, is that trade-off of needing setup on my board worth it for running this card, or do I just want to fall back on that base 4? Having that base 4 around, I feel, is very, very important, because it means regardless of the specifics of what your deck is doing, you always have these baseline counter runes that you can fall back on, and you don't feel pigeonholed into building your deck a specific way to enable the other counter runes. And I think that's very important for decks being able to be varied, to see even the amount of diversity we saw in the top cuts towards the end of Moonrise. Now, I do want to touch on some of these other ones. Don't Poke the Bear is, like, the big one, because, like, Don't Poke the Bear is very obviously the 7th. Don't Poke the Bear is a card that reliably impacts combat, and that's why it's the reason to play bears. Like, it is very apparent that, like, it is not a matter of these specific cards just being, oh, they're just so good, you're just always going to start with 3 of each. That's obviously not the case. And there's very clear ways to make cards that pull people away from running necessarily all those cards in favor of more archetypal stuff, like Don't Poke the Bear. Don't Poke the Bear is an extremely scary card, but, like, if we look at the other counter runes up to the end of Moonrise that see like some fringe play, like in sideboards, we have Chains, which saw a lot of play in 2 premieres ago. A lot of people were experimenting with it. This is good aggressively, but it doesn't do anything for you defensively typically. Dense Fog has some good utility, and on occasion can impact combat if it's being used into very specific things, but it's not going to be able to reliably do that. Divine Blessing will stop big plays, but again, will not reliably impact combat. Pandora's Box is very similar to Chains, and very importantly, does not stop the Elestral from attacking, does not destroy anything, so it is basically incapable of affecting combat. And very frequently, you'll find you use Pandora's Box on a searcher, and your opponent goes, okay, I'm still going to swing with this over your guy and take away your board presence. You just pay 2 for that. Spoiled Fruit is closer, but like I think a big part of the issue that Spoiled Fruit has run into throughout this format is that the Elestrals that it hits and gets off the field are mostly ones that aren't threatening your board state anyways. They're ones that your opponent will prefer to play out onto an open board state, or when they're confident that their other Elestrals are able to beat over whatever you have. And therefore, a lot of the time, Spoiled Fruit isn't able to help you maintain your board state. The lunar ones are able to, but Waxing Gibbous requires your opponent to be on lunars, or be in a situation where you need to switch your lunar Elestral back to the position it was originally in after getting swapped by like an Eddy or Tsunami. Waxing Crescent is very specific to the lunar phase deck, however, is a very powerful combat trick in a similar vein to Don't Poke the Bear. And Lunar Phase Full Moon is able to function as a very powerful combat trick under Temple, but these all do require some more specific deck building, more specific archetypes for them to be able to fulfill this functionality. And then we come to Firestorm, which I do think is making significant steps in the direction of giving us more options, because that's ultimately the solution. The solution is not to take away the options we have and make filling out that lineup of combat affecting counter runes more difficult and more strenuous on our deck building compositions to accommodate. The solution is to give us more options for cards that are able to reliably affect combat. Like, I'd really like to see in a future set a cycle of 8 1-cost counter runes, 1 for each element, that are all like they just negate an attack and then they do some small bonus that's like in line with what that element wants to do. Like an easy one would be Solar. Solar could be like you negate an attack and then you foretell 3 so that you can help set up any of your stuff that cares about knowing the stuff on the top of your deck. Stuff like that would be really, really cool to see. You could have like a Frost negate that its negate effect is just a negate, just negates the attack, however has another effect that gives you like some small benefit when it's milled from your deck. That's the sort of thing you could do to really give people more options. And like there's been plenty of times where like some of the generic suite of counter runes has not felt fantastic into the current format, and people would like a more efficient option or something that plays more into the specifics of their archetype. But at current, we're not really getting a whole lot of those. Again, Firestorm is better about this. Breeze is a pretty powerful combat trick. I'm pretty excited to experiment with this card. I think this card has a lot of potential. It's the one that, like, of these 4, it's the one that most reliably is going to be able to impact combat. Monsoon is a really cool card because, like, it has a lot of the functionality of Dense Fog, but can also do stuff like turn off an artifact that your opponent is using to boost their stats high enough. It can shut down their Zeus or Demeter before they can use the effect after they put it down on the field, protecting your Elestral from combat for that turn if they were relying on the Zeus or Demeter to get over. You can shut down Stadium runes that are, again, buffing stats. And then there's also the thing where because it can enchant a water onto a Lestral on your field, it forms a very powerful combat trick with the Champion of Poseidon Galaxy. Very powerful combat trick. Like, pretty comparable to Argo in how powerful that play is. And it costs less than Argo, too, which is really cool. I like that line a lot. I like Monsoon a lot. I think it has a lot of potential. Then getting into like some more specific stuff, we have for the Hestia's Spiders deck, we have Hestia's Hearth. That forms an extremely powerful combat trick with specifically Champion of Hestia Warmite, where it's able to drop the attack stat of something swinging in, or the attack stats of 2 different Elestrals. One thing's attack stat by 6, or 2 things by 3 each. And you pay 1 to do that, get 2 spirits out of your underworld, and then the Champion Warmite will heal to itself. Very, very powerful stuff. Like, extremely powerful combat trick. Like, this is the kind of thing I want to be seeing. If it's going to be something more specific, I want the payoff for getting that more specific combination to affect combat to be huge, to be like a big blowout. That really puts my opponent on the back foot. And then we've got Hermes Trickery, which you can use to like swap out your Elestral for something else and keep your board presence by going like, okay, my opponent is attempting to swing over my Elestral. I will wait until battle step, then I will Hermes Trickery, pop my Elestral, bring out something else from the underworld that is going to maintain my board presence, and then their attack is going to go direct at me. So they're unable to attempt to combat that board presence I just gained using Hermes Trickery with that attack. That's really cool stuff. That's stuff that meaningfully impacts combat. That's stuff that like is doing similar stuff to what we are trying to get out of the other counter runes. And that's the sort of thing we need to be seeing. Restricting the options that we have is not going to magically make people want to have less of this type of card. We need this ability to protect our board presence and get ourselves ahead in the game, and restricting that instead of giving us more options is just the complete opposite of way of how this should be approached. I also want to touch on one very specific thing. I would hate to see Gorgon's Gaze get restricted in any way. I think Gorgon's Gaze is one of the coolest cards to play with around. Only beaten out by Altar, to be honest, or some more archetype-specific things. Gorgon's Gaze just has like a lot of different use cases that makes it extremely versatile. If you like the attack negate part of Gorgon's Gaze, which is frequently how you're going to end up using Gorgon's Gaze, that part is inefficient. That part is very clearly inefficient. You compare it to like Shield. Shield is typically 2 spirits to negate the attack and get the Elestral off the field. Tsunami is typically 1 spirit to stop the attack. Altar is typically 1 spirit or less to stop the attack. It is very clearly inefficient in that role, but because of its versatility, there's a lot of different things you can do with Gorgon's Gaze that make the card super cool to play with, and I love the card a lot, and I wouldn't want it getting restricted anyway. I wouldn't mind PTR Shield getting restricted, though. But I do think like the small issues I do have with those cards are going to become less and less an issue with the design direction we're seeing in Firestorm, with more special ascensions and more special casts, which make it easier to take advantage of the very clear blind spots those cards have. With all that said, I hope you guys enjoyed this video. I hope to do more of these discussion videos in the future, talking about like where my head is at with this sort of like card design stuff. I really do love talking about card design and like the ideas that are in my head regarding game balance. Like it's just fun to talk about. It's fun to talk about like different perspectives on these things. So I hope to do more videos like this in the future, and some that are just talking about like deck building theory and to help like some people improve. That would be cool to do. I hope to do more of these in the future. So I hope you guys stay tuned for any of that. If you're watching this the day it comes out, I am planning on doing a live stream later today, opening my Shard Stars Taurus packs, as well as a couple Premier packs from the the premiere, not the one that just happened, but the one before that. So look forward to that, and I'll see you guys next time. This is Harry Search signing off.